Good afternoon, and for some of us, good evening. I'm so glad you're here to join a conversation we have entitled Women of Color Write, Navigating Publishing as Black, Indigenous, and Women Authors of Color. Everyone is welcome in this space, but this space is centered by and for Black, Indigenous, and women of color who are already writers or are seriously exploring becoming published writers. We hope this conversation will be inspiring and empowering to you. My name is Sue Parker, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm the denominational minister for transformative peacemaking for Mennonite Church USA, and I have the privilege to oversee Women of Leadership of MCUSA, steered by an amazing committee like Maribel, who is translating for us, who have helped to organize this two-part series to explore the world of publishing for women. I'm so grateful, excited, and honored to host these three brilliant writers, to listen to their wisdom and their adventurous journey as published authors. We have only about 60 minutes together, which I have a feeling will go quite fast. This webinar is being recorded, and we are also on Facebook Live. Before we jump in, I'd like to invite the participants to introduce themselves in the chat box, the participants, not the panelists, introducing your name and the Indigenous land and the resilient people you'd like to acknowledge as we begin our time together. I wish that we could sit around and really do this in a place together, but this is what we have. So we would love to just know where you are calling in from. And while you do that, I'd like to ask our three authors in alphabetical order to introduce themselves, which means Christy Lauren Adams, Candace Marie Bimbo, and Karen Gonzalez in that order. Thanks.
Hey, everyone. It's nice to virtually meet you. My name is Christy Adams, and I am currently, my day job, that is working at a boarding school in Pennsylvania called the Hill School. And my title is Dean of Spiritual Life and Equity, which basically means I have one salary and two jobs. I oversee, it's a fancy title for one salary and two jobs. But I oversee spiritual life and diversity, equity, and inclusion here. My side gig has been, as of late, writing. And I wrote a book called Parable of the Brown Girl. And I have a book coming out in March, an adult book and a middle grade book called Unbossed: How Black Girls Are Leading the Way, which I'll talk a little bit more about. I graduated from Temple University and Princeton Seminary with a Master of Divinity. That's it. Candace, take it away.
Hi, everyone. My name is Candace Marie Bimbo. I am a writer and public theologian. My first book, Red Lip Theology for Church Girls Who Consider Tithing to the Beauty Supply Store When Sunday Morning Isn't Enough, comes out January the 11th, 2022, and I am super duper excited. I write all day, every day. I am published in Essence magazine. I consider Essence to be my home team. Essence, Glamour, Madame Noir, and a couple of other places, Shondaland. I graduated from Tennessee State University in 2004. I have a master's in sociology from North Carolina Central, and I have a Master of Divinity from Duke Divinity School, and I'm really excited to be here.
All right, my name is Karen Gonzalez, and I am a speaker, a writer, a storyteller. I am an immigrant from Guatemala. I immigrated to the United States as a child, and I went to the University of South Florida, where I was an English major, and I was a public school teacher for my first life for 7 years. And then I went to Fuller Seminary in California, where I studied theology and missiology. And I'm a nonprofit professional. I'm kind of like Superman. By day, I have a job, and by night, I have another one. So by day, I'm an HR director at an organization that serves refugees and other immigrants. And I sort of write like I'm having an affair in sort of the edges, corners of life. Find those hidden moments to do that. I did write a book that was published in 2019 called The God Who Sees, Immigrants, the Bible, and a Journey to Belong, where I shared my own immigration story as well as the stories of some of the immigrants that are in the Bible. Yesterday, I turned in my second book manuscript to the publisher. So that's a big, big cause for celebration. It's also a book on immigration. Really, I'm just trying to elevate the discourse in the church around. And that book is called Beyond Welcome. And I also have a podcast with a few friends that's by Latinas, for Latinas. It's called Café with Comadres. And that's me.
Wow. Okay, we just need to sit with those introductions because writing is an affair. Like, oh, that's. I'm thinking right now. Thanks to all three of you for the incredible work that has influenced so many of us. Your writing matters, and we want to encourage other women to write in this space as well. And so we wanted to ask you lots of questions to glean a lot of wisdom from you. So I wanted to begin by asking how you started. How did you get started in writing, and who encouraged you to write? And was there anyone who discouraged you to write? So we wanted to kind of start maybe asking Karen.
Sure. Great question. So I'm sure you have seen this. It is the artist Snoop Dogg, and he's giving part of a thank you speech at an award show. And he says, and finally, I want to thank me. I want to thank me for always believing in me. I want to thank me for working hard and never giving up. Honestly, that's how I feel about my writing. There was no champion. I was not that student that the teacher believed in that said, you're going to be a writer someday. I started writing because I became passionate about causes. And I saw narratives and rhetoric being advanced that I thought were dangerous and incredibly harmful to my community. And that's really what motivated me to start writing. And I started writing as a guest on a blog. And then I just started pitching to different online and print publications. And that's how I started writing. And there wasn't anyone who actively discouraged me, but I would say that there are sort of a certain standard, right, of what people are looking for in writing, of what people think is professional, of what people think is quote unquote good writing. And so to a certain extent, you adapt to that and then you push the limits, right, subversively to be yourself in those spaces. And so that's how I began to write.
I love that. Others?
So I feel like my answer is a bit cheesy because I was always writing. Like I actually have, if I should have brought it with me, it's in the other room, but I wrote a book in 5th grade. And my mama had it bound and laminated for me. And every year for my birthday, she gave me a journal. And so I was always writing. I was on my high school newspaper staff. Our city created, when I was in high school, a teen page, and I was one of the first writers for that. When I went to college, I wrote for a while on our college newspaper. I was always and felt much more comfortable writing than I did talking, which was very interesting because I'd never shut up in class. But I always felt much more confident in writing. Ironically, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a writer. And I had this dream that I was going to own a brownstone in Brooklyn, and I was going to write from that brownstone. Somehow, when I got to high school and when I got to college, I kind of talked myself out of the writer dream, and decided I would do it in other career paths. A series of unfortunate and fortunate events brought me back to writing primarily. And I started with my own blog. I launched my blog in March of 2010. It was a blog spot, and I kept writing, and I still have my own blog. And there are sometimes when I don't want to pitch something, I want my words to be on my site. I've only had, and I'm pretty sure we'll get into this in other questions, but as far as discouragers, my first agent, I had an experience with my first agent that really discouraged me to the point where I did not believe that writing was for me. And it's scary how somebody that you can meet that fairly new in your life and recent in your life, that their words could be that powerful, that you would think maybe this wasn't for me. And it took my current agent, who I say will never get rid of me, to really breathe back that dream into life for me. But yeah, I've always been writing. It is my sanctuary. It's my safe place. I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 journals right now on my desk. So yeah, I've always been writing.
I would say for me, I always felt like the theater stage was the best pulpit. And so I started off writing plays, and never thought about books or essays or anything like that. I felt like my experience, particularly Black theater that I had gone to see, I would have these transcendent experiences in these little black box theaters, or at Crossroads Theater in New Brunswick, New Jersey, that is. And so I wanted people to feel, I felt like there was a message that people could get in that theater space that they weren't necessarily getting in the church. And so I felt like my ministry was to writing plays. And when I was in college, I started a performing arts ministry and took some playwriting classes. I wasn't a playwriting major, but my electives were. And so I wrote and produced like 2 or 3 plays in college. Now, when you're that age, you think, you can do anything. I look back now and I'm like, what was I doing? But at the time I thought, oh, I'll just write a play and fund it. And, not a big deal. I mean, of course I ran into obstacles, but that's where that started. And then when I was in seminary, I wrote and directed a play up until 2015. So that started for me in 2001. And so that was where the writing was. I never saw it beyond that. Now, I think I will say that that is part of my writing journey. I won't start it anywhere else, because the creative part, the idea of seeing your words being acted out, seeing people watch your words being embodied in another human being. I mean, there's so much joy. So I would call that my first love. And everything else flowed from there. When Candace mentioned Blogspot, I was cracking up because I had a blog spot, and you say what you want. There's no editing, you know. I didn't care, you know. And there was something else before Blogspot. I forgot what it was, where I'm going to figure out what that was. But there was something else that I did in seminary. And I just wrote stuff that just wasn't even like appropriate. But that was where that writing started. And then later it'd be an article or two. I'm not a big article writer, but an article or two. I haven't written many of that. And for the book, my pastor that I grew up with and was ordained under Buster Soaries, he said to me, oh, you should write a book. And I was like, I don't have that much to say. You know, it was like a lot of words, you know. I felt like I had enough to say to like put up a blog, you know, or write an article. And he said, you write about what you know. And I said, well, I don't know anything, you know. And later on, you know, that sat with me for maybe a year or two after. It was a while before I would write a book. But I was like, oh, I could write about being a Black woman. I'm a Black woman, you know. So that was where that journey began.
Oh, thank you all. Write what you know. And I think that is a place that's wonderful, but also really difficult, particularly as Black, Indigenous, and women of color. And so what would you want women of color to know from your experience? Because like you said, some people, I don't have a story. I don't know what to write. My story is not very particularly interesting, or, you know, I think we don't get that kind of platform. And I have heard a lot of that self-initiation, right? Or a mother giving you a journal every time and saying, your story matters, right? Karen saying, no, I like to thank me and me, myself, and I, because there wasn't that encouragement or those words. So what are some things that you'd like other women, particularly BIPOC women, to know from your experience as writers and as authors?
I'll start with this. I'm looking through bookstore, and I see a particular type of person writing the same book over and over again, right? Just in different ways. And getting these book deals, making all this money, you know, and they're not women of color, right? Yet we feel like, oh man, my next book deal, we gotta cross our T's and dot our I's and come up with the topic of all topics. And not to say that we shouldn't hold ourselves to that standard, right? But there's something that I've just been noticing. I mean, how many times can you write about washing your face or whatever the phrases are that I hear over and over, you know what I mean? Over and over again. And no shade, but no shade. I wonder what it is about these non-women of color, people of color, right? Like getting these deals for seemingly mediocre topics. I'm just going to be honest, and huge deals. And so what I want to say to women of color writers is, don't put so much pressure on yourself, you know what I mean, to stand out, to have to be so unique. As this thing has followed me my whole life, our whole life, being the only Black girl in a classroom, you know what I mean? Like those types of things, feeling like I have to stand out, I have to go sort of above and beyond in order to excel. It follows you into adulthood. And now here we are in the publishing world. And there's like a very similar feel that I'm like tempted to feel, and I'm not saying, put out mediocre, proposals or things like that. But I do wonder, and this is just open-ended, I wonder why, our stuff has to be this way. And then their stuff can just be the same book written 100 million times over and over again, and these big publishing companies and these big money, and all of that. And I don't get it. That's me venting. The others can respond however they want.
No, you're absolutely right. It was one of the reasons why I was intentional about saying I'm a Christian author and I'm a Christian writer, even if my articulation of Christianity and the way that I express it looks different from mainstream. I wanted it to be clear that I write about my and Black women's relationship with Jesus, because I was going into Lifeway, I was going into Barnes and Noble, I was going into Borders, rest in peace Borders, my favorite bookstore, when and I wasn't finding books and devotionals by women who looked like me and my mama, right? And I was reading it and saying, okay, I can use this chapter and not use these next 3 chapters because this has absolutely nothing to do with my lived reality or experience, right? And it was frustrating. And I had to be very clear to myself and to the people around me that my experience mattered and the women around me, our experiences mattered. And it is frustrating to see that, not, and Christy, not only will it be the same book over and over and over again, a lot of us who are in these spaces can tell when non-women of color have taken the works and the words of women of color and recycled and rehashed them. And so our string of tweets or our stream of consciousness now becomes the book that they get to, get millions of dollars in an advance on. And we're trying to figure out what's going to be our next thing. That is frustrating. And the more of us who are in the industry, hopefully we can work to change that and hold the legs and the feet and the hands of the movers and shakers and power makers accountable. But what I will say to women of color who are writers and interested in being creatives is what I always say: start somewhere, right? Like, start the blog, be consistent on the blog, start the Patreon, start the newsletter, start the Substack, because the truth is that there are people who want your words. There are people who are interested in what you have to say. And all of us can attest to the fact that those small steps really were what helped to put us in the positions that we're in, right? That even if as we were building a catalog and a repertoire, we also had, our newsletters, we also had our blogs. And so I think it matters in a world where everybody or anybody can go viral depending on what people are feeling that day. It is important to maintain a commitment to the craft. And a commitment to the craft is lived out through consistent writing and honing your voice outside of these spaces that may matter. And so creating your own home base and nurturing that through your own blog, through your own vlog, through your own newsletter. I think that's really important. And too often I meet and talk to a lot of women who want to be authors. They want to be professional writers, but when I ask them about their own blogs, or newsletters, they don't have one. And so it's really important to maintain that space.
Absolutely. I fully agree that if you want to be a writer, you need to write. And I want to say 20 years before I had anything published that anyone read, because writing doesn't mean that it's being published. It just means that you're committed to doing this thing that you love. I would write a story about our family for my brother and my sister for Christmas. I would just write stories about, for them as a gift, something that I remembered about them. And so I want to fully agree with Candace there that you need to be writing if you want to be a writer. And I think you can be very creative with that. You know, I've seen some people do really wonderful things and microblogging on Instagram, but they do it consistently. I've seen people do things on Twitter, on the threads, you know, people that are famous for doing really good threads. You can be creative and subversive about how you want to take up that space of writing. And the other thing I want to say is, Christy and Candace both touched on this. You know, you might have heard that last year a book came out, or maybe it was the year before, I'm losing track of time here, but it was a book called American Dirt, and it was supposed to be about immigration. And this white woman got a 7-figure deal for writing a book in which it's not even clear that she's ever been to Mexico. And she's just writing this immigrant experience. And, you know, I wrote a book about immigration because of stories like that, because I kept seeing people co-opting our stories. And I thought someone with a lived experience of displacement needs to write a book. And I kept saying that, you know, to a friend of mine who finally said, well, why don't you write that book? You know, and in part, that was a huge motivation for me, is seeing that our stories were being told by other people and not ourselves. And there's got to be room for us to share our stories as well, and not have them co-opted by other people. And so your story matters. It doesn't have to be incredible. It doesn't have to be full of trauma for other people to consume, because that's something that, as people of color, that we're fed to, that people only want to read about our traumas and our suffering and consume that. And it doesn't have to be that either. And in fact, when I wrote my book, I was really careful not to write the worst things that had happened as part of my immigration experience, because people should care about my life because I'm a human being, not because I've suffered horrible traumas. And so I want to reiterate, yes, you need to be writing, but also your story really matters. And we've been told in lots of implicit and explicit ways as people of color that our stories are not as important, or they're kind of peripheral to other stories that are centered and more important. And I think it's important for us to own that. And for me, part of that was calling myself a writer, taking on ownership of that title and saying, I am a writer because I'm a person who writes. And own that, take that badge of honor and say that you're a writer. It doesn't matter if you're not publishing. It only matters that you're writing. And so I want to reiterate that. And yes, there are gatekeepers in publishing. And yes, they are white. That's true. And we can talk more about that later, but you can still own that, and you can still be writing and calling yourself a writer.
So before you finish,
Yes.
you had asked to the first time, had we ever been rejected, discouraged, excuse me. Forgot to mention that bouncing off of Candace, Parable the Brown Girl was rejected the first time that I pitched it, because they felt like the audience or the demographic that I was writing about was too narrow. That Black girls by themselves was a narrow audience, and that I can include their stories in other chapters. That was a moment of discouragement for me, just for like 5 minutes, but it was discouragement. So I had to mention that because it goes to some of the things that Karen was just saying.
Thank you so much. And I so resonate with what Karen said about how our stories are often periphery. And so like Christy said, when you are trying to center your story of young woman, young Black woman, they just don't see why that would be in the center of it. So that's powerful words. Thank you. So, you know, we all are very familiar with all these intersectional conversations, right? To not only talk about us as women of color, but now here's this Christian publishing industry. How has that been a unique experience for you? Or maybe it's hard to talk about that because that is the only, or you have not been in that conversation or in that experience. But yeah, in what ways has being a woman of color in the Christian publishing industry been a unique experience? And that's not always just for a book, but it could be for articles and others.
Yeah, I'll start and say it's been particularly interesting as somebody who is very clear I'm not evangelical, and I want to be very specific about the kind of Christianity I want to discuss. That can shape the ways that you have a lot of opportunities, right? And so even before I got the book deal, the offers that I would get to write articles only wanted me to write about what it was like for me to be a Christian who has sex. And I would always tell people, like, there's absolutely more to Black women's lived experience as Christians than whether or not we're having sex. Like, that is, we actually think about more than that. So I would love to write about more than that, right? But when I was very clear that Red Lip Theology was the kind of book that I wanted to write, and I wanted it to be a deep theological text, it was very interesting to get the feedback from some publishers that would say, like, can we cut the faith part and let this just be a feminist tome? And I'm like, no, like, I am as Christian as I am feminist, like that the two go together. And so now, I am deeply grateful for the home I found at Convergent Books and Penguin Random House. They know who I am. They're very clear about the kind of work that I want to do, the kinds of things that I desire to write, and I have support there. But at the same time, they are a minority, right? Like it's not that many places in Christian publishing that really give voice and give space for our kinds of stories, right? Like, that. First of all, can we just talk about the fact that somebody said no to Parable, to Parable of the Bronco? Like, who, like, in what world? Because that book was fire. It's fire. Like, in what world does that even make sense? You know what I'm saying? But, like, who, you know what I'm saying? But that goes to show that there are not that many spaces for us to really be and do who we are, right? So it's very interesting, right? So now I'm on, and I'm gonna say this and be quiet. Now I'm on my book is 2 months out, right? So now we're shaping book tour, who I'm gonna talk to, all these things. So my publicist sends this, we're talking, and she sends this thing, and it's like Moody Bible Institute, Christian Broadcast Network, Trinity Bride. I was like, at least I'm not talking to these people, right? For what, right? I don't even think they're smart. So and I know they're not gonna care about what I have to say in this book, but they also, even as there's room, even as we are trying to create room in Christian publishing for new voices, we also got to talk about the audience and the gatekeepers around media that support these books, right? So I'm looking at this list that it was an amazing list of all of the places that are possible. And she was like, so where are you saying, what are you saying no to? And the sad part was, I was like, I think it's easier for me to tell you where I will go on this list versus where I won't go, because that's longer, right? So in this space, we are also up against what it looks like. At least I'm experiencing this for my first book. Where do you go and where do you find the support in this space when you are saying, I want to have a different kind of conversation about faith and womanhood than what is dominant and what is present, right? Where do you go to have those conversations and also still be considered in the Christian space? And so I think I didn't hear that from a lot of sisters before I got here. And so one of the things that I'm trying to do is have that conversation with sisters who are coming behind me.
You didn't hear my amen corner, but I don't know if you saw it. This is a little church thing happening. I was like, yes, okay. But I was on mute. You probably saw it because she's bringing me back, right? Like, it's so true. And I feel like Candace articulated what I've been feeling for the past year and a half or so. Just haven't been able to say it. I didn't, you put words to it. You know, so Parable had this little essence mention and certain other mentions. And I'm not saying that my publisher didn't do that. What I am saying, there was a fair amount. I had to find my audience because Parable did have a little article on CBN. I don't know why. I mean, fine. Okay. Grateful. But there was some trying to figure out who the audience was so difficult. For so many reasons. For starters, it would be people saying, oh, I want to get this book for my 9-year-old. And I'm like, it's not for that. I'm saying that adults can learn from the wisdom of Black girls. So it's not for children. It's also theological, right? There's cultural part of it. There's also theological part of it. The theological part, like Candace said, it's significant, it's important. It couldn't just go to a certain, like you said, feminist or Black feminist area. There was a theological part that could not be ignored, because the statement that I'm trying to make is that God not only sees these young girls, but God embodies, God speaks through, all of that, and that we learn about God from the existence of these girls. There is no audience for that. So I was on they had this like blog tour for me. I don't even know who these blogs were, white women. I don't know who they were. They were like, stay-at-home moms or something. I had a bunch and I was grateful, but we just could not narrow the audience, and couldn't figure out where to put me. And that was very frustrating, and frustrating for me too. And so you always partner, they partner to do the marketing. They say that, so you're a partner with your publishing company. And so I hired my own book assistant. And I said, look, here's some podcasts, let's come up with some lists of some, magazines, and let's try to get them in, because the people that they hired to work with me for Parable for the promotions were really like pitching it to these Southern white evangelical audiences. And I couldn't figure out why. And even to this day. So now that we're doing the marketing for Unbossed, I'm having these flashbacks. They're not doing that. But I've been there from before. But at the same time, it is, there is that God piece. There is that theological piece that we just cannot ignore either. So it doesn't matter if it's in essence or whatever. We're talking about Jesus, so my 2 cents.
Yeah, thanks, Christy. I agree with that. I think there's a lot of challenges within the publishing industry. And that's why I want to start by just saying writing is absolutely always worth it, always good and always rewarding. Publishing, not so much all the time. I want to say that if you have dreams of publishing, just be realistic about what you're walking into and who the gatekeepers are in that space. I had a really good experience with publishing. I have the confidence of like a 2-year-old that just stumbled into the sanctuary and is like stumbling down the aisle. And so when I started writing and I decided I was going to write a book, I knew that I didn't know anything about the business side of publishing. I knew about writing. I'd been a teacher of literature and writing for years, and I'd been reading for years, and I'd been writing, privately. And then I started writing publicly. And to write publicly, you have to, one, be ready to deal with rejection. You may write something that you think is really brilliant. There's I wrote a book on immigration, but there's a white woman who spent 5 minutes working with immigrants and wrote a white savior book about immigrants. And she won all kinds of accolades and awards, for her book. And I'm not going to lie to you, that's hard. It's hard for me to see that, but she also has particular things, that the publishing world is looking for. And so that story is very popular. People like the white savior story, as harmful as we recognize that it is. So I went to a conference to learn about the business of writing. And from that conference, I went to different workshops. It was not a long conference, it was a couple of days. And I got a template for a book proposal. And it was there really that I learned, and I sat down and I worked on a book proposal. And I didn't know where to pitch it, and someone I had met at that conference suggested working with Herald Press, and I did. That's who I worked with. And honestly, I had a really great experience. I had a great editor that I had a good relationship with and still do. And it was a good experience. Now, the marketing part was really hard. And that's the part that really nobody talks about. And this is what Christy and Candace are getting at, is that writing is one thing, but the other part of being a writer that publishes is marketing and speaking, and to some extent traveling and being a guest on podcasts and talking about the same thing over and over again. That is new to the people you're talking to, right? But that's a big part of publishing. They're going to want to know things like how many followers you have on social media, and do you have a newsletter, and how many people receive it. And these are things that are a reality as well. And so this is why I tell people publishing isn't always worth it, but writing is always worth it. So you just have to weigh what it is that is most valuable to you. If you really can't handle the rejection, maybe it's not time to start publishing, but it's okay to keep writing. If you are still really struggling with imposter syndrome, maybe it's good to push yourself and to encourage yourself to put your words out there and have them published. It can be in your own blog. It can be, it doesn't have to go into the Washington Post for it to be valuable, good words. So yeah, that's what I would say. It's a mixed bag, and it's challenging to navigate. My second book, I went with a different publisher. I got an agent, and that has been a really good experience in terms of now you have a partner that's helping you navigate this world, and who knows how to negotiate and how to get you the best deal for you. And so, yeah, I would say, just go into all of these things with your eyes open, because writing and publishing really are two different things.
That's so helpful. Thank you, Karen, and all of you for helping us to encourage us to continue writing, but to enter into the second part of it with both of our eyes open. And Karen, you just kind of gave us the segue to the next question really nicely. What resources have been helpful in your writing journey? You mentioned a conference. You go to these places and sometimes it's overwhelmingly like you're the only person of color. So where have you found spaces where you would really encourage, like you guys can vet it, like these are really great resources conferences, gatherings, writing cohorts that I would truly encourage you to do. We really want to lean into your wisdom for those resources. Are there grants, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where do you go for these things? Because
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I want to say one of the best resources, that conference, I was honestly one of like two people of color there. No, maybe there were three of us, but two of the people were presenters. I honestly couldn't find another person who was there who was not white. And so, I brought it up as a question. And here's another reality as women of color that is important for you to understand. There was a woman of color there who is a pretty successful writer. And, she had these appointments. So I went to talk to her about some of the challenges of publishing as a woman of color. And she seriously acted like I was crazy, like there was no racism, no. And she just kept saying, you just be a good writer and that's all that matters. And what it revealed to me was, and we're all, just trying to survive, right? This world of white supremacy that we live in. So no shade to her, but I just knew she wasn't going to be someone that was going to be like an ally, someone who was going to be able to be a mentor, because she was denying my very reality of just being in this conference where I was the only person of color. And so I have found a writing group of fellow Latinas who are writers, and it's very small, but we encourage one another and we read each other's writing. That has been the best way. Once you get into this field, and social media, for all its problems, is wonderful for this. That's how I met these women, was through social media. I remember one time putting out a tweet that said, who are all my LGBTQ affirming Latinx people? And all these people responded, and that's really how I got to know them. And so I think you can build a network so that you can yourself have the support that you need, and people who understand where you're coming from. The writing conferences are overwhelmingly white. I mean, I can't really recommend them to you as safe spaces, but they are places where there will be some networking that you can do and some learning that you can do in terms of the business of publishing. Now, there was one notable difference. I went to a Collegeville writing workshop. So the Collegeville Institute, if you haven't heard of it, I encourage you to check it out. Their workshops are free. I mean, they're sponsored. They're not free. And I was able to go to one that was led by Dr. Shaniqua Walker Barnes and Jonathan Wilson Hargrove. And the book that I wrote, that I just turned in yesterday, it began out of a conversation with Dr. Shaniqua at that workshop. And, we were talking about colorism, and I was telling her about what I've seen in the Latinx community. And so it was really a great conversation, and it really led me to start a new book proposal and to do that. So this was a great place to have conversations. Nearly everyone there was a person of color as well. And so that was encouraging to see. These are all people who are creating and people who care about this. And we had this week to spend together. It felt like being back in college or something, where you're living in a dorm. So that space was really encouraging. And I try to do something for my writing every single year. Now, I would say pandemic has made that challenging. But if you can do something for your writing, something for you to learn, something for you to practice, even if it's virtual, I think it's really great to keep learning and writing, and of course to keep reading as well. But that was a great resource for me. And if you have a friend, a writer friend who has published, it's also a great resource to help you kind of understand the market, because like Candace and Christy, I also write about faith. I'm a person of faith, and that matters to me. And so I want to write about that, and I want to write from that perspective. So.
Yeah, kind of with Karen. So I honestly can't recommend any of the writing workshops and writer conferences. Like I went to a couple and I was like, all these white people are getting on my nerves. So I left. I will say that I've been in several writer groups. I'm looking to actually get into another one at the top of the year. But having people that I was accountable to as a writer has been so important to me. Um, Also, the only time I am not reading is when I'm writing a book. Because I can't have another set of voices in my head at the time that I need to write. But I'm always reading. One, I'm reading because I need to be filled for books, but two, I'm also reading because I want to see how people are structuring sentences. I want to hear how their words are flowing. That matters to me, right? So whether it is a book, whether it's an article, like I love I love the techniques of writing. Like that is something that matters to me. So I'm reading books on the techniques of writing. So I'm currently, another part of my career is that I'm a ghostwriter. So I cannot remember his name, but I'm currently reading his book on ghostwriting. He's a Christian author, but he's talking about it from the perspective of what it means to shepherd someone else's story and get it to where they need it to be, and talking about, the value of their voice and learning what it means to embody their voice so that you can move their story forward. Um, other like, I mean, I I'm always gonna recommend books. So part of what may work for some of you is to literally go into your favorite place where you get your books and put in the art of writing, the techniques of writing. Read books about what it means to do spiritual autobiography, if that's something that you want to do. Um, Also, like Karen said, the writers that you admire that already have kind of this, that have approachable, because that matters, approachable social media um, presences will be amazing resources, right? So I was writing a fledgling writer, and I know I was in their inbox more times than I probably thought was appropriate, but so many of them emailed me back and responded to me. I've never met Tayari Jones in my life, but I sent her an email, and not only did she email me back, she asked for my address, and she sent me the most beautiful card. And in the card, she said, "We need your words and your voice in the chorus." I have held on to that, right? Because that mattered so, so much to me. Um, Also, now you have podcasts and videos. You can go on YouTube. If you have the ability to do it, Masterclass is that year-long subscription or that monthly subscription. However, if you have the ability to do that, I do Masterclass. Like I am now working a new muscle of screenwriting, which is completely different than all the other writing that I have done. So I'm taking classes. I have Masterclass. Like Karen said, I am always honoring the gift and the call of writing by feeding it, right? So one thing that my friend said to me one time is she said, "It's not enough to answer the call. We have to be faithful to it." And so I believe I'm called to write. Like I believe that that's what I'm called to do. it's not enough for me to just answer it. It means I got to be faithful to it. So I'm writing, I'm reading, I'm listening, I'm finding classes, I'm finding people that I trust that can read my words and help me think through stuff. And like Karen said, I have allowed my heart to slide a little off my sleeve so that when somebody reads my stuff, like I have a group that just read some stuff that I wrote that I'm trying to think through for the second book. I thought it was amazing. I mean, I was like, yes, this is it. When she finished, she was like, what are you talking about? And I was like, wait, you didn't get she was like, after 3 pages, like I stopped because I don't know what you're talking about, and they not gonna know what you're talking about. And I needed that, one, because obviously I'm not being clear enough, right? And so I need to rehash and reconfigure some things. But that matters as a resource, and it's a valuable resource. So there's so many things that are available that weren't always available. And unfortunately, because publishing is so white, you're gonna have to pick and pull from a lot of different places to get the resources that you need.
I don't have too much more to add. I concur with everyone. I watched some sort of added unique resources that were helpful to me, or things that are a little bit more out of the box. That I watched The Pieces I Am, the Toni Morrison documentary, probably like every Sunday, like for a minute, and that was church. You know what I mean? I wasn't going to church, that was church for me. It was so inspirational to me. I felt like I needed to find, because the self-motivation was a really hard part for it is usually hard in writing in general. When I wrote Parable, I was grieving because I lost one of my best friends, and it was just a really difficult writing process, very lonely. And there were times where I felt really good and I was ready to write, and there were times where I was just sad or exhausted or whatever. But something like that. I mean, shoot, even the Tina Turner documentary, even though it wasn't about writing, anything where I felt like there was a woman, particularly a Black woman in resilience who pushed through the odds. And I'm like, I could do that too, those were helpful. Toni Morrison, of course, because she was a writer. And like when Candace was talking about the type of writing and words, and hearing her and her editing, and it was just so helpful to push me. So those were outside of just other authors and writers. There were a few books that I leaned on during Parable, Sister Citizen being one, Melissa Harris Perry's book, anything by Monique Morris. But I like Candace said, I didn't read it during, like I wasn't reading. They just, every time I wrote, I had those few books with me on the side. Like, I don't know what that was or why, even if I didn't reference constantly, it was always in my bag with my laptop when I would go to Panera Bread or wherever. And even something as like little as, just the environment, the resources. Like I listened to Nina Simone's For Women a lot when I was writing. I mean, those are things that you may not consider like conventional resources, but they were helpful. I needed anything that was going to help inspire me, the white noise that I needed to have in the background, the music, the authors that I admired, the documentary watching to inspire. So those I consider my friends. Those kept me company when I was writing, and helped me, I guess, get to the finish line.
Oh, so much wisdom. I can't believe we haven't even gone through the questions. Like we're almost done. Karen, did you want to say something real quick?
I just wanted to say really quick, a book that I have really enjoyed. I work full time and I have a pretty demanding job, and but a book that I have found is really helpful to me with my creativity is Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. And I just listened to it on Audible, and as an audiobook. I listen to a lot of audiobooks when I'm folding laundry. because, you hear the rhythm and the beauty of words. And, a lot of us that are, BIPOC, we come from cultures where there was a lot of oral storytelling, right? And so it's really beautiful to sort of engage in that practice. And I listen to all kinds of different memoirs at the moment. I just listened to one called Crying in H Mart. And whenever I hear a turn of phrase that I really like, I write it down. I have a little notebook in my purse and I write down. A good practice for any person who wants to do creative work is paying attention. I got my car towed this weekend, unfortunately, but I was sitting in the tow truck with the driver, and I noticed, he had this tattoo on his forearm that said "blessed," and I was listening to him, and I'm watching him, and really, we live in the world, and you don't have to be, off in a cottage writing. The world that you live in is the world that you can pay attention to and write about. And so, yeah, getting immersed in stories is really important.
The world you live is a world you can pay attention to. Wow. Thank you. As you're doing laundry, as you're sitting in the subway or a bus, so inspiring. It's so true. One of the questions, have you heard of publishing in color conferences for Black Christian writers? What do you guys think about that, Candace? I see you nodding.
I've heard of it. I know a lot of people have, I know a lot of my friends have attended and have been successful with it. I went to one and it was after I had gotten my deal. So yeah, like I know a lot of people who have done well there.
So thank you, Barbara, for giving us that. Yeah. I mean, again, we could say a lot more. I mean, there's a really great question. What are your thoughts on a white writer writing a book on Black history? But I am going to kind of skip that because we are really talking about centering our stories as women of color. So, but that is a great question that we could do on another time. I really want to honor our panelists for their time and to thank them. Oh my gosh, I've been like scribbling on the right, just I think my head is down for most of this Zoom call because I'm just trying to write and catch your words. Thank God it's recorded and that it can be shared, that it is being shared. I want to just really thank you for your insights and also for the participants to come and join us today. As I said, this is recorded and we will get back to you next week on Facebook, YouTube, and also wanted to just give a shout out to Women in Leadership Steering Committee, particularly Melissa Flor-Vixler, who have organized a lot of our speakers to come. I know you have helped to put an amazing panelist here. And I just feel very privileged to be in this circle, to lean in and to listen. So thank you. Thank you, you beautiful, brilliant authors. Continue to inspire us with your writing and all of the work that you're doing. We will follow and we will continue to be inspired, not only to read your words, but to also write, because as Karen said, we need to keep on writing because our stories do matter. Thank you everyone for coming. Blessings to you all. Be well. Take care. Bye.